Welcome back to Scales and Tails. So you bought a $50 reptile thinking this is going to be a pretty inexpensive pet. And then you bought the enclosure, and the UVB, and the heat lamp, and the substrate, and the bugs. And suddenly that $50 reptile isn't looking too cheap anymore. We're going to talk about some expensive beginner mistakes in this video. Let's get into it. Next are reptile starter kits. They look really convenient because everything is supposed to be right there in one box. But here's the problem. Just because it says starter kit doesn't mean everything inside is actually what your reptile needs or wants. You might end up replacing the UVB, thermometer, substrate, hides, lighting, or even the enclosure itself. Before buying a kit, look at every single item included and ask, should I buy this separately for my reptile? If the answer is no, the kit isn't saving you money. Like when I bought Luna a kit and I had to throw out half of the stuff inside because I didn't need or want it. Here's one thing you really don't want to get wrong: UVB. Different reptiles have different UVB requirements. You can't just grab any UVB bulb off the shelf and assume it's correct. Depending on your species, the type of strength of UVB, distance from the animal, fixture, and whether it's mounted above or below the mesh can all matter. If you buy the wrong setup or starter kit, you'll probably have to replace it. More importantly, inadequate UVB can contribute to serious health problems in species that depend on UVB for vitamin D3 production and proper calcium metabolism. So don't guess. Research the specific UVB requirements, or watch my channel, shameless plug, for your reptile before you buy anything. If you've watched my video about red lights, you already know where I'm going with this one. For years, reptile keepers were told reptiles couldn't see red light, so red bulbs were commonly used at night. But reptiles can see and perceive red light, and red isn't the only one. Blue lights, moonlight bulbs, and other visible nighttime lights aren't necessary for most reptiles and can interfere with providing a natural light and dark cycle. So you might buy that red bulb, then learn you shouldn't be leaving visible light on all night. And now you're buying something else. If your reptile actually requires supplemental nighttime heat, look into appropriate non-light producing heat sources for that particular species, controlled properly with a thermostat. Please, and I'm begging you, I have seen people doing this. Don't just stick your hand inside the enclosure and say, yeah, that feels warm enough. Your hand isn't a thermometer. Temperature is extremely important for reptiles because they're ectothermic and rely on their environment to regulate their body temperature. You need an appropriate equipment to monitor temperatures. Depending on the setup, that may include digital thermometers with probes and an infrared temperature gun for checking surface temperatures. And remember, air temperature and surface temperature aren't necessarily the same thing. Buying a good equipment from the beginning can save you from replacing inaccurate equipment later. This might be one of the biggest enclosure mistakes. You walk into a reptile expo or pet store, you see the one, and suddenly you're going home with a reptile. Except you don't have an enclosure or UVB or the right heat source or supplements, and you don't even know what you're feeding it tomorrow. And now you're rushing around trying to buy everything at once. Instead, set up the enclosure before bringing your reptile home. Get your heating and lighting running. Check your temperatures and make sure you have the correct food and supplements. Then bring your reptile home. Not only can this save you from panic buying the wrong products, but your reptile gets to come home to an enclosure that's already ready for them. This is probably the expense nobody wants to think about: the veterinarian. Reptiles can get sick just like any other reptile, and you'll want access to a veterinarian who actually treats reptiles. That can be more expensive than people expect. Your reptile might have only cost $50, but that doesn't mean its veterinary care is going to cost $50. Before bringing home any animal, you should know where your nearest qualified reptile veterinarian is and have a plan for unexpected medical expenses. Here's probably the biggest thing I want you to take away from this video. The reptile itself might be one of the cheapest parts of owning a reptile. A low purchase price doesn't mean a low cost pet. You still need an appropriate enclosure, lighting, heating, food, supplements, enrichment, substrate when appropriate, replacement bulbs, and veterinary care. And trying to make the setup as cheap as possible can sometimes end up costing more when you have to replace everything later. Now, if you've already made some of these mistakes, that's okay. Reptile care changes and we're all constantly learning. I've made mistakes too. What matters is when we learn something better, we make changes to do better for our animals. Research the animal before you buy it. Build your setup around what that species actually needs, not around what's cheapest or what happens to be sitting on a pet store shelf. Sometimes spending a little more money on the right equipment the first time saves you a lot of money later. Now I want to hear from you. What's something you bought when you first got into reptiles that you eventually had to replace? Let me know down in the comments, so maybe we can save another new reptile keeper from making the same mistake. If you learned something today, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more reptile care, myth busting, and adventures with Lola and Luna. That's it for Scales and Tails. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.